My name is Leon Thompson, and I'm 67 years old. I spent 40 years of my life building something from nothing, watching concrete pour and steel rise under my careful planning. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I sat in that lawyer's office with my own son standing behind me, pushing me to sign papers that would have destroyed everything I had worked for. The pen felt heavy in my weathered hands, and somewhere deep in my gut I knew something was terribly wrong. What happened next changed everything, and I'm still grateful for the stranger who had the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Before I tell you how one sentence from a stranger changed my life forever, I want to know where you're watching this from. Are you at home relaxing after a long day? Or maybe taking a break at work? Wherever you are, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because this story will make you think twice about trusting anyone, even family, with your life's work. And trust me, you'll want to hear every single word of what comes next. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how I got to that moment. I built Thompson Construction from absolutely nothing back in 1983. Started with a beat-up pickup truck, a toolbox my father left me, and more determination than sense. Sarah, my beautiful wife of 38 years, stood by me through every late payment, every difficult client, every sleepless night when I wondered if we'd make it through another month. By the time I turned 60, we had something real. The company was pulling in steady revenue. We owned our home on Riverside Drive outright, and I had managed to save enough money to feel secure about retirement. Sarah used to joke that I worried about money like some people worry about the weather, always checking, always planning, always making sure we had enough for whatever storm might come our way. Then, 8 years ago, Sarah lost her battle with cancer. The woman who had been my anchor, my voice of reason, my partner in everything, was gone. Marcus, our only child, had just finished his MBA at Harvard and landed a position with Morrison & Associates, a financial consulting firm downtown. I was proud of him, incredibly proud, but there had always been something distant about Marcus, something cold that I couldn't quite put my finger on. After Sarah's funeral, Marcus started visiting more often. At first I thought it was his way of grieving, of staying connected to family. He'd bring these thick folders full of documents and spreadsheets, talking about investment opportunities and financial planning. The numbers he threw around made my head spin, but he had that Harvard education, that confidence that came with expensive schooling and a corner office. I owned the construction company, outright valued at $3.2 million. The house Sarah and I had called home for 25 years was worth $850,000. I had $1.7 million in various savings and investment accounts. Not bad for a guy who started with nothing but calloused hands and a willingness to work 16-hour days. But lately I'd been feeling tired, not just physically tired, but soul tired. Tired of managing crews and dealing with difficult clients and worrying about permit delays and material costs. I wanted to step back, maybe travel a little, maybe finally read all those books Sarah had been recommending for years. The idea of retirement, of letting someone else handle the day-to-day stress, was starting to sound pretty appealing. That's when Marcus started talking about restructuring my assets for better tax benefits. He made it sound so logical, so necessary, like I was being foolish by not taking advantage of these financial tools that could save me thousands of dollars every year. Marcus began showing up at my house twice a week, always carrying his leather briefcase and wearing that serious expression he'd perfected in business school. He'd spread documents across Sarah's old dining room table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, and start explaining concepts that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Estate planning, Dad," he'd say, pointing at charts and graphs with his expensive pen. "Tax shelters, trust funds, asset protection strategies. You're sitting on a fortune, but you're not protecting it properly." The way he talked, you'd think I was one step away from bankruptcy instead of having more money than I'd ever dreamed of as a young man. I'll admit I didn't understand most of what he was telling me. Terms like revocable living trust and tax optimization vehicles went right over my head. But Marcus was my son, my Harvard-educated son who worked with wealthy clients every day. If anyone knew how to handle money properly, it had to be him. Still, something felt off about these visits. Marcus never stayed for dinner anymore, never asked how I was doing or whether I was lonely in that big house. He'd arrive with his papers, launch into his financial presentations, and leave as soon as I started asking too many questions. When I'd try to slow down and read through the documents more carefully, he'd get impatient. "Dad, you're getting older," he'd say, and there was something in his tone that made me uncomfortable. "You need to protect your assets before something happens. What if you get sick? What if you can't make decisions for yourself? This planning needs to happen now while you're still mentally sharp. The implications stung. Was he saying I wasn't mentally sharp? I'd been managing complex construction projects and running a successful business for decades. My mind was as clear as it had ever been. But Marcus had a way of making me doubt myself, of making me feel like an old fool who didn't understand the modern world of finance. What really bothered me was how he'd avoid looking directly at me when he talked about these plans. His eyes would dart to his papers, to his phone, anywhere but my face. And he always seemed to be in a hurry, checking his watch, taking phone calls, acting like he had somewhere more important to be. Then there were the documents themselves. Every time I tried to read through the fine print, Marcus would flip to the signature pages and point to where I needed to sign. The details are just legal boilerplate, Dad. Standard language. The important thing is getting this filed before the end of the tax year. But I hadn't built a successful business by signing papers without reading them. Sarah used to tease me about reading every word of our mortgage documents, our insurance policies, even our phone contracts. Leon, she'd say, you read terms and conditions like they're love letters. Maybe she was right, but that careful attention to detail had saved us from plenty of problems over the years. The pressure Marcus was putting on me felt wrong, but I wanted to trust him. He was my son, my only child, the boy Sarah and I had raised to be honest and responsible. Surely he wouldn't steer me wrong about something this important. That's when Garrett Phillips entered the picture. Marcus introduced him as a colleague from Morrison & Associates, someone who specialized in estate planning for high-net-worth clients. Garrett was 42 years old with graying temples and the kind of steady demeanor that inspired confidence. Unlike Marcus, he seemed genuinely interested in taking the time to explain things properly. "Mr. Thompson," Garrett said during his first visit to my house, "I know this can seem overwhelming. Financial planning isn't something most people think about until they have to, and then suddenly there are all these decisions to make." He spoke slowly, clearly making eye contact when he talked. It was refreshing after weeks of Marcus's hurried presentations. Garrett walked me through what they were calling a comprehensive financial restructuring plan. The basic idea was that I would transfer all of my assets into a trust fund, with Marcus serving as the trustee. I would receive a monthly allowance from the trust, enough to cover all my living expenses, plus some extra for travel and entertainment. "Think of it as hiring someone to manage your investments," Garrett explained. "You'll still have access to your money, but someone with financial expertise will be making the day-to-day decisions about investments and tax planning. It takes all that stress off your shoulders." The way Garrett described it, the arrangement sounded almost appealing. No more worrying about market fluctuations or tax implications or investment strategies. I could focus on enjoying my retirement while Marcus handled all the complicated financial stuff. But even as Garrett was explaining the benefits, I noticed something strange happening. Every time Marcus would chime in with comments about protection or security, Garrett would shoot him these odd looks. Not obvious enough for Marcus to notice, but I caught them. Little flashes of something that looked almost like disapproval or maybe concern. "The most important thing," Marcus kept emphasizing, "is that this protects you, Dad. If you ever develop dementia or have a stroke or something, your finances will already be properly managed. You won't have to worry about making mistakes or being taken advantage of by scammers." There was that word again. Protection. But protection from what exactly? I was a healthy 67-year-old man with all my mental faculties intact. I wasn't wandering around confused or writing checks to phone scammers. The way Marcus talked, you'd think I was already halfway to a nursing home. Garrett seemed uncomfortable every time Marcus brought up these scenarios. He'd clear his throat, shuffle his papers, change the subject. It was subtle, but after 40 years of reading people in business negotiations, I'd learned to pay attention to body language and tone of voice. The documents they wanted me to sign were extensive, page after page of legal language that would take hours to read properly. Every time I started to dig into the details, Marcus would redirect my attention to the summary pages, the ones that made everything sound simple and beneficial. "Dad, we don't need to get bogged down in all the legal terminology," Marcus would say. "That's just standard trust language that lawyers are required to include. The important thing is the overall structure." But Garrett would sometimes contradict him in small ways. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, you should read through Section 12 carefully. That covers your rights as the trust beneficiary." Then Marcus would shoot Garrett a sharp look, and Garrett would quickly move on to something else. I told them I needed a week to think it over. Marcus wasn't happy about the delay, but Garrett actually seemed relieved. "That's wise, Mr. Thompson. This is a big decision. Take all the time you need." As they were leaving, I caught Garrett glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't the look of a financial advisor who'd just presented a great opportunity to a client. It was something else entirely. Something that made me wonder what I was missing. A week later, Marcus called to set up an appointment with Henderson and Associates, the law firm that would handle the final paperwork. We were scheduled to meet at their downtown offices on a Tuesday morning to sign all the trust documents and make everything official. That morning I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not anxiety exactly, but something close to it. A restlessness that reminded me of how I used to feel before big construction deadlines when I knew something important was about to happen, but couldn't shake the feeling that I'd forgotten some crucial detail. I stood in my bathroom looking at myself in the mirror Sarah had picked out years ago, and remembered something she'd said during her final weeks in the hospital. We'd been talking about Marcus, about how he seemed to be changing as he got older, becoming more focused on money and status than on family and relationships. "Leon," she'd said, holding my hand with what little strength she had left, "always trust your gut feeling. You've got good instincts about people, even when you don't want to believe what you're sensing. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong." At the time, I'd thought she was just worried about Marcus's career taking him away from family values. But standing there that Tuesday morning, her words echoed in my mind with new meaning. The plan was for Marcus to pick me up at 9:30, but at 9:15 my phone rang. It was Garrett. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to call at the last minute, but Marcus asked me to drive you to the lawyer's office this morning. He got pulled into an emergency client meeting and will meet us there." Something about Garrett's voice sounded strained, like he was choosing his words very carefully. When he pulled into my driveway 20 minutes later, I could see tension in his shoulders and the way he gripped the steering wheel. The drive downtown was unusually quiet. Normally, Garrett was friendly and talkative, asking about my construction projects or sharing stories about his own family. But today, he seemed lost in thought, checking his rearview mirror more often than necessary and drumming his fingers nervously on the steering wheel. Every few minutes he'd glance at me through the mirror, and I could see something struggling behind his eyes. It was the look of someone who wanted to say something, but couldn't quite bring himself to speak the words. "Everything all right, Garrett?" I finally asked as we stopped at a red light. He turned to look at me directly for the first time that morning. "Mr. Thompson, He started to say something, then stopped himself. "Yes, sir. Everything's fine. Just thinking about the paperwork we need to cover today." But his voice suggested that everything was anything but fine. When we arrived at Henderson and Associates, Marcus was already there, pacing in the reception area with his phone pressed to his ear. He ended his call when he saw us and immediately launched into his usual efficiency mode. "Good, you made it. I've already reviewed everything with Mr. Henderson. The documents are ready for signature. This should only take about 20 minutes. 20 minutes? To sign away control of everything I'd spent 40 years building. When I'd bought my first piece of construction equipment, I'd spent 3 hours reading the financing agreement. When Sarah and I had purchased our house, we'd gone through the mortgage documents line by line over the course of 2 days. But Marcus wanted me to transfer millions of dollars worth of assets in 20 minutes. Robert Henderson, the attorney, was a thin man in his 50s who spoke in the careful, measured tones that lawyers perfect in law school. He had the trust agreement laid out on his conference table, all 43 pages of it, with little yellow sticky notes marking where I needed to sign and initial. "Mr. Thompson," Henderson began, "this is a fairly standard revocable living trust agreement. Your son has explained the basic structure to you, I believe." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I really understood any of it. The whole thing still felt rushed, like I was being swept along by forces I couldn't quite control. Marcus stood behind my chair as Henderson flipped to the signature pages. "Dad, just sign here, here, and here," he said, pointing to the marked lines. His hand rested on my shoulder, but instead of feeling comforting, his touch felt heavy, almost possessive. I picked up the pen, the expensive-looking thing that Henderson had provided, and held it over the first signature line. All I had to do was write my name, and this would all be settled. Marcus would handle my finances. I could stop worrying about investment strategies and tax implications, and I could focus on enjoying my retirement. But Sarah's voice echoed in my mind again. Trust your gut feeling. And my gut was screaming that something was very, very wrong. I was about to press the pen to paper when I felt someone grab my wrist. Garrett's hand closed over mine with surprising firmness, stopping me mid-motion. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice shaky but determined, "don't sign that. You need to read everything carefully first." The conference room went silent. Marcus's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Garrett, what the hell are you doing?" But Garrett didn't back down. He stood up from his chair, still holding my wrist, and looked directly into my eyes. "Leon, if you sign this document, you'll lose everything. This isn't estate planning. This is theft." The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at Marcus, expecting to see confusion or outrage at such an accusation. Instead, I saw panic in his eyes, the kind of panicked expression I'd seen on the faces of subcontractors who'd been caught cutting corners or inflating their invoices. "Garrett is having some personal issues lately," Marcus said quickly, but his voice was higher than normal, strained. "He's been under a lot of stress at work. Maybe we should reschedule this for another day." Henderson looked bewildered. "I'm sorry, but I need to understand what's happening here. Mr. Phillips, are you saying there's something improper about this trust agreement?" Garrett released my wrist but didn't sit back down. "Mr. Thompson, look at page 17, section 4, subsection C. Read what it says about trustee powers." With shaking hands, I flipped through the document to page 17. The legal language was dense, but as I read through it slowly, certain phrases jumped out at me. "The trustee shall have absolute discretion over all trust distributions. The beneficiary shall have no right to demand or compel any distribution from the trust. The trustee may at his sole discretion modify the terms of any distributions based on the beneficiary's best interests." I looked up at Garrett, feeling sick to my stomach. "This means Marcus can decide whether or not to give me my own money." "That's exactly what it means," Garrett said. "And there's more. Keep reading." The further I read, the worse it got. Marcus would have complete control over all my assets. He could sell my house, liquidate my business, invest my money however he saw fit, and I would have no legal recourse to stop him. The monthly allowance I'd been promised wasn't guaranteed. It was entirely at his discretion. "This can't be right," I said, looking at Marcus. "You told me I'd still have access to my money." Marcus's face had gone pale. "Dad, you're misunderstanding the legal language. Of course you'll have access to your money. I would never do anything to hurt you." But Garrett wasn't finished. "Mr. Thompson, there's something else you need to know. The reason I know about this, the reason I'm here today, is because Marcus asked me to help him with this plan 3 months ago." I felt the room spinning around me. "What plan?" "He told me about his gambling debts," Garrett said quietly. "He owes $400,000 to some very dangerous people. He's been getting threats demands for payment. He asked me to help him figure out how to access your assets to pay off these debts." Marcus exploded. "Garrett, shut your mouth. You don't know what you're talking about." But Garrett continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I told him I wouldn't help him steal from his father. That's when he came up with this trust idea. He was going to use your assets to pay off his gambling debts and then gradually pay you back over time. Except there's nothing in this trust agreement that requires him to pay you back anything." I stared at my son, my only child, the boy Sarah and I had raised and loved and supported through college and graduate school and every challenge he'd ever faced. "Marcus, is this true?" The silence stretched for what felt like hours. Finally, Marcus collapsed into his chair and buried his face in his hands. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I was desperate. The people I owe money to, they're not the kind of people you can negotiate with. They threatened to kill me." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My own son had been planning to steal everything I'd worked for, everything Sarah and I had built together to pay off his gambling debts. "You were going to steal everything from me," I whispered. Marcus looked up with tears streaming down his face. "I thought I could pay you back. I thought I could make some good investments, earn enough to cover the debts and return your money. I never meant for you to get hurt." Henderson cleared his throat. "I think I need to advise you, Mr. Thompson, that this conversation suggests potential criminal activity. I'm required to report suspected elder abuse to the appropriate authorities." I stood up from the table on shaking legs, still trying to process what I'd just learned. My son, my only family, had been planning to rob me. If not for Garrett, if not for his last-minute attack of conscience, I would have signed away everything and been left completely dependent on Marcus's goodwill. "Garrett," I said, turning to the man who had saved me from financial ruin. "Thank you." He nodded, his own eyes wet with tears. "My father went through something similar with my older brother 5 years ago. I couldn't watch it happen again." I walked out of that conference room in a daze, leaving Marcus crying at the table and Henderson reaching for his phone. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my relationship with my son, had been destroyed in the space of 10 minutes. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Garrett offered to drive me, but I needed to be alone with my thoughts. I needed to try to make sense of what had just happened and figure out what came next. When I walked through the front door of the house Sarah and I had shared for 25 years, the silence felt different than it ever had before. It wasn't just the quiet of an empty house. It was the silence of complete isolation. The last person I had considered family had just tried to steal everything from me. I sat in Sarah's favorite chair in our living room, surrounded by photos of happier times. Pictures of Marcus as a little boy building sandcastles on family vacations. His high school graduation where he'd looked so proud and we'd felt so hopeful about his future. His college graduation, his MBA ceremony, his first day at Morrison & Associates. How had that bright, promising young man turned into someone who would rob his own father? The phone rang several times that afternoon. Marcus called 6 times, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was there to say? How do you have a conversation with someone who had just tried to steal your life's work? Garrett called around 5 o'clock. "Mr. Thompson, I just wanted to check on you and make sure you're all right." "I don't know if I'm all right," I admitted. "I don't know if I'll ever be all right again." "I understand," Garrett said. "What Marcus did was unforgivable, but you should know that stopping him was the right thing to do. You would have lost everything." Over the following days, the full scope of Marcus's situation became clearer. Garrett shared what he knew about the gambling debts, the threats Marcus had been receiving, the desperation that had driven him to consider stealing from his own father. It didn't excuse what Marcus had tried to do, but it helped me understand how he'd gotten to that point. I learned that Marcus had been gambling online for years, starting small, but gradually betting larger and larger amounts as his losses mounted. He'd been living a double life, maintaining his professional facade while spiraling deeper into debt and desperation. The people he owed money to weren't just bookies. They were connected to organized crime, and their threats were very real. But understanding Marcus's motivation didn't make his betrayal any less painful. I'd trusted him completely, been proud of his success, looked forward to having him manage my affairs so I could enjoy a peaceful retirement. Instead, he'd been planning to rob me blind. I made the difficult decision not to press criminal charges against Marcus. He was still my son despite everything, and I couldn't bring myself to send him to prison. But I also couldn't maintain a relationship with him. The trust had been broken so completely that I didn't see how it could ever be repaired. Henderson, the lawyer, followed through on his obligation to report the attempted elder abuse to the authorities. Marcus lost his job at Morrison & Associates when the company learned about his gambling and his attempt to defraud a client's family member. His career in financial services was over. Meanwhile, I had to figure out how to rebuild my life at 67 years old. For weeks after the incident at the law firm, I felt completely adrift. I'd lost my only child, my only family connection, and I didn't know how to navigate this new reality of total independence. Garrett became an unexpected source of support during those dark weeks. He'd call to check on me, invite me for coffee, offer practical advice about managing my finances on my own. It turned out that his father had gone through a similar betrayal with Garrett's older brother, so he understood the complicated emotions I was dealing with. "The hardest part," Garrett told me one afternoon as we sat in my kitchen, "is learning to trust your own judgment again. When someone you love betrays you like that, it makes you question everything you thought you knew about people." He was right. I found myself second-guessing every interaction, wondering if people were being genuine or if they had hidden motives. Even simple conversations with neighbors or store clerks felt fraught with potential deception. But gradually, with Garrett's encouragement, I began to engage with the world again. I started attending activities at the local senior center, something I'd never had time for when I was running the construction company. I joined a book club, took a cooking class, even tried my hand at oil painting. To my surprise, I discovered that I enjoyed the company of people my own age who were also navigating the challenges and opportunities of retirement. These weren't people who saw me as a potential source of money or advantage. They were just fellow travelers looking for friendship and community. I learned to manage my own finances, something I probably should have been doing all along instead of relying on Marcus's supposed expertise. It turned out that basic financial planning wasn't as complicated as he'd made it seem. I hired a fee-only financial advisor who worked on an hourly basis, someone who had no incentive to sell me products or services I didn't need. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts again. Sarah had been right when she told me to trust my gut feelings about people and situations. That uncomfortable feeling I'd had in the lawyer's office had been my subconscious, recognizing that something was very wrong, even when I couldn't articulate exactly what it was. Garrett and I developed a genuine friendship over the months that followed. He never asked for anything from me, never tried to sell me financial products or services, never treated me like anything other than a friend who happened to be 25 years older. His integrity and kindness helped restore my faith in human nature. About 6 months after the incident, I received a letter from Marcus. He'd moved to another state, found work in a completely different field, and was attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. He wrote that he was sorry for what he'd tried to do, that he understood why I couldn't have a relationship with him anymore, and that he hoped someday I might be able to forgive him. I never wrote back, but I kept the letter. Forgiveness, I've learned, is more complicated than people make it sound. I don't hate Marcus, and I hope he's able to build a better life for himself. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean allowing someone back into your life when they've proven they can't be trusted. The truth is, my life is better now than it was before I discovered Marcus's betrayal. I have real friendships based on mutual respect rather than family obligation. I have interests and activities that bring me joy rather than stress. I have financial security that I manage myself without depending on anyone else's promises or expertise. Most importantly, I've learned that family isn't always defined by blood relationships. Sometimes the people who care about us most are strangers who become friends. Sometimes the people who save us are individuals we barely know who choose to do the right thing when it matters most. Garrett Phillips saved me from financial ruin, but more than that, he saved me from a life of dependence and vulnerability. His moment of courage in that lawyer's office changed the trajectory of my entire future. I think about that moment often, about how different my life would be if Garrett had stayed quiet, if he'd chosen to protect his own interests rather than speaking up for mine. I would have lost everything I'd worked for, would have been completely at the mercy of a son who had already proven he was willing to steal from me. But Garrett chose courage over comfort, honesty over self-preservation. He risked his own professional relationship with Marcus to protect a man he barely knew. That kind of moral courage is rare in the world, and I'll be grateful for it for the rest of my life. The experience taught me that we never really know people as well as we think we do, even people we've loved for decades. But it also taught me that there are still good people in the world, people who will do the right thing even when it's difficult or costly for them. I'm 70 now, 3 years older, and considerably wiser than I was when I almost signed those papers. My life is full of new friendships, new interests, and new appreciation for the simple pleasure of making my own decisions about my own future. Sometimes the people who save us are strangers, and the ones who try to hurt us are those we trust most. But if you listen carefully to that voice inside you, the one that tells you when something doesn't feel right, it will usually steer you toward safety and away from harm. I want to hear from all of you who've watched this story. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting yourself? Have you experienced that gut feeling that saved you from making a terrible mistake? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your experiences might help someone else who's facing a similar situation. Please give this video a thumbs up if it made you think about the importance of trusting your instincts, and subscribe to this channel for more real-life stories that matter. Share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the warning signs of financial manipulation, because knowledge really is the best protection we have. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when the people pressuring you are those you love most. Take care of yourselves and keep trusting those gut feelings that are usually trying to protect you.